I'm Ava, 38. I've always been the planner, the payer of car insurance and internet bills, the one who sets reminders for oil changes and dentist appointments. For years I told myself that kind of care was love, inventorying the small things, so the big things could bloom. But that night, the sauce burned while he zipped the duffel he'd packed when I wasn't looking, and something inside me burned with it. Not anger, not yet. Just a clean, cutting clarity that felt almost like mercy. He took the keys to the car I'd finished paying off last spring. "I'll get the rest later," he said, avoiding my eyes like they might ask questions he had no interest in answering. "Don't contact me." He left the door open long enough for the hallway light to bleed into our kitchen. Then it clicked shut, and the apartment swallowed the sound like it had been practicing. I drained the pasta and dumped it into the sink. It slumped there, overcooked and useless, like a metaphor too on the nose to say out loud. I turned off the stove, wiped my hands on a towel, and opened my laptop. I don't think of myself as vindictive. I think of myself as practical. He wanted out. I wasn't going to make a bonfire of my body to light his exit. So I did the math, the kind I'd been doing invisibly for years. The shiny rewards card with his name embossed, but my account underneath supplemental. Disabled. The second card we used for groceries and emergencies that had slowly become dinners with friends I'd never met, cancelled. The monthly transfer I had set up from my checking into his personal buffer, the one that made his part-time consulting feel less like a choice and more like a lifestyle, deleted. The international roaming he loved to use for inspiration trips, off. I didn't rage. I reconciled. It wasn't cruelty. It was continuity. He had declared a new arrangement with a single sentence. I simply aligned the accounts to match it. My hands trembled, but the clicking of keys steadied me. Consequences aren't a weapon. They're a mirror. He said he was gone. I believed him. The first night I slept like a person who had been holding her breath for a decade and finally exhaled. On the third night he knocked. It was that kind of knock, impatient, insistent, a drumbeat demanding the door's obedience. Through the peephole I saw his hair, unruly jacket missing, a hoodie I'd never seen hanging off his shoulders like borrowed dignity. I opened the door but kept my body angled to the frame. I wasn't inviting the past to come in and sit down. My card was declined, he blurted. At dinner. Not starving then, not stranded. Just embarrassed. "You cancelled it." "Yes," I said evenly. "It's a supplemental card. You said not to contact you. That includes my bank." His mouth opened and closed the way a person's does when they realize the room they thought they owned has rules. "Why would you do that?" Because I used to believe love meant cushioning his landings, arranging my days around his detours, leaving the porch light on, no matter how late he came home. Because I had learned the hard way that mercy without boundaries is just enabling with prettier words. "You moved out," I said aloud. "I respected your request." "The visa too?" he asked, anger seeping through the cracks of his surprise. "Yes." "And the transfer?" "Stopped." He swallowed, eyes flicking over my shoulder like he might spot the life he'd walked away from, sitting obediently on the couch. "You can't just cut me off. We're married." "We are," I said. My voice was steady and, to my own astonishment, kind. "And I didn't touch any marital assets." "Your account is your account. The car's titled to you. The house is premarital, mine before us, still mine now. The cards were gifts while we were together. You've chosen to be not together." He stared, the calculation in his gaze finally tripping over reality. "I need help," he said, and for a moment I saw the man I had once loved, the one who pressed a forehead kiss to my hair when I fell asleep revising a report, the one who texted me photos of sunsets like they were apologies. Then I remembered the luggage packed before the conversation, the phone he couldn't seem to put down long enough to say goodbye. The softness evaporated. "Ask your friends," I said gently. "Or pick up more hours at the studio. You're talented." It wasn't a taunt. It was the truth he'd refused to stand on. He made a sound, half scoff, half wounded animal, and threw the old words at me, the ones that used to work, controlling, cruel, ungrateful. They bounced off the door and fell at his feet. I didn't need to prove I wasn't those things. I needed to keep my boundaries standing. "You'll regret this." he said finally, rage brightening his eyes like a match held too close to dry paper. I already regret the years I mistook silence for love, I said, and closed the door, with the care you give to expensive glass. On the other side, he shouted that he would get a lawyer. I poured water, drank, and waited for my hands to stop shaking. In the days that followed, he tried other doors. My receptionist, who earned herself a bonus for screening his calls with calm firmness. Mutual friends, some of whom parroted his outrage until I stopped answering. His sister, whose talent for volume could shatter crystal, and who informed me that standards of living are not something a husband is allowed to rescind. I listened. I documented. I didn't engage. If there's one thing you learn when a person detonates your home and demands rent from the crater, it's this: a boundary is not a debate. It's a fence around your future. At night in the purposefully quiet apartment, I would catch myself reaching for the old reflexes, texts drafted and deleted, explanations rehearsed and discarded. Then I'd breathe. He had asked for space. I was honoring it right down to the line items. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was practicing survival. And survival, I was learning, can look like the dullest choreography. Cancel, confirm, collect yourself. Repeat. It doesn't make for a thrilling story, but it builds the ground you stand on, for the climax you don't yet know is coming. The lawyer's letter arrived 2 weeks later, hand-delivered by a courier, who looked uncomfortable standing in my doorway. I thanked him, closed the door, and set the thick envelope on the kitchen counter like it might bite. My hands shook as I slid my finger under the flap, unfolding the neatly typed accusations inside. He was demanding spousal support, claiming that he had become financially dependent on me during our marriage. That my canceling the cards, the transfers, the gifts had left him destitute. That I had abandoned him without warning. The irony was almost laughable if it hadn't been so sharp, so cruel. He left me, and yet here he was, painting himself as the one discarded. I sank into a chair, the weight of the paper pressing down on me. For a moment, the old guilt seeped in, that reflexive ache that whispered maybe I was being too harsh, maybe I should have softened the landing. But then I remembered the bags packed before he ever spoke a word, the doors swinging closed without a backward glance, the texts he never sent, the silence he demanded. He had chosen this ending long before I enforced it. I called my lawyer, Denise. She read the papers, her voice clipped but steady. He doesn't have a case, he's grasping, but will need to be thorough. Her confidence steadied me like a hand at my back. Send me everything: bank statements, receipts, proof of what was yours before the marriage. The more we have, the clearer the truth will be. So I gathered it all. Years of careful files, folders labeled in neat handwriting, evidence of the life I had built brick by brick while he sketched dreams in sand. Mortgage papers, utility bills, purchase receipts, emails confirming the accounts had always been mine. I spent nights combing through drawers and cabinets, every document a reminder of how much I had carried, how invisible my labor had been until it was weaponized against me. Court was a theater I never wanted tickets to. He sat across the aisle, shoulders slouched, but eyes darting like a man rehearsing excuses. His lawyer painted him as a victim, a husband blindsided, left with nothing by a wife who wielded money like a weapon. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, waiting for my turn. When Denise presented the evidence, the accounts in my name, the receipts in my handwriting, the texts where he demanded independence while quietly relying on my support, the story unraveled. The judge's gaze sharpened as she flipped through the stack. When she spoke, her words cut clean. This court does not find grounds for spousal support. The respondent left the marital home voluntarily. The financial resources in question were never jointly held. Claim dismissed. His face crumpled, a flash of disbelief, then fury. He muttered under his breath, his lawyer tugging at his sleeve to quiet him. I felt no triumph, only a strange, steady release. The kind that comes when a truth you've been screaming silently is finally spoken aloud by someone with the power to make it matter. Afterward, in the courthouse hallway, he caught my arm. His grip was weaker than I remembered, his eyes bloodshot. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You think you've won, but you've ruined us both." I pulled free, holding his gaze. There was no us left to ruin. Then I walked away, my heels echoing on the polished floor like punctuation marks to a sentence I was finally finished writing. That night I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. Outside, the city pulsed with life, people laughing on sidewalks, headlights threading through the dark, music spilling faintly from a nearby bar. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I felt like someone stepping back into the current of her own life. But healing isn't a single moment. It's a series of choices. And I knew the hardest choices were still ahead. Type continue to receive the next part. Banda noi, continue chejibitida noi. The hardest part wasn't the courtroom or the paperwork. It was the silence that followed. When the noise of his accusations and the adrenaline of defending myself finally quieted, I was left with the echo of what used to be a marriage. The empty half of the closet, the silence of my phone, the way I still reached for 2 coffee mugs in the morning before catching myself. Betrayal is loud when it happens, but healing is made of quiet, and sometimes the quiet can be deafening. I threw myself into work at first. Long hours at the office, extra projects, anything to keep me from sitting too long with the emptiness. But no matter how many spreadsheets I filled, how many deadlines I conquered, grief seeped into the edges. I started waking at 3 a.m., the kind of waking that leaves your chest tight and your thoughts racing in circles. I'd pace the apartment, touching objects we'd bought together, a lamp, a rug, a framed photo from a vacation, and wonder how something that felt so permanent could dissolve into nothing. But then something small shifted. One evening as I was walking home, I passed by a pottery studio with wide windows. Inside, people's hands were shaping clay, spinning bowls and vases into being. There was laughter, clay smudges on cheeks, the kind of simple joy I hadn't felt in months. On impulse, I stepped inside and signed up for a beginner's class. It felt ridiculous at first, my hands clumsy, the clay collapsing when I pressed too hard. But there was something about the process, about taking something shapeless and giving it form, that mirrored what I was trying to do with my own life. Slowly, I started to find myself in that clay. Each imperfect bowl was a reminder. Broken things can still be remade. Weeks passed, and little by little the fog began to lift. I stopped counting the days since he left. I stopped measuring my worth against his absence. I started filling the apartment with new things, a bright rug, a stack of novels, plants that reached for the light in a way I wanted to learn from. My home no longer felt like the site of a crime. It began to feel like mine again, but healing also brought clarity. With distance, I could see the cracks that had always been there, the way I had carried the weight of responsibility, while he chased distractions, the way he framed his needs as urgent and mine as optional, the way I convinced myself his silences were moods instead of messages. I realized I hadn't just lost a husband. I had lost the illusion that love alone could hold up the world. Then came the final twist. A friend sent me a screenshot one afternoon, his social media post carefully curated, painting himself as the abandoned one. He wrote about how I had been cold, how I had cut him off financially, how I had ruined what could have been. There were likes and sympathetic comments, people comforting him for the tragedy of a wife who in their eyes had turned cruel. For a moment rage surged hot through me. But then I laughed, a small broken laugh, but a laugh nonetheless. Because anyone who needed strangers' sympathy to rewrite history was still trapped in the story I had already escaped. His lies no longer defined me. They only defined him. That night I lit a candle and sat on the floor, letting the flame flicker against the walls. I whispered to myself words I never thought I'd believe again. You survived. You are free. And for the first time since that kitchen conversation the night he said, "I'm moving out. Don't contact me," I felt it was true. But survival is only the beginning. What came next was the part I had to choose deliberately. Not just living without him, but living for me. Choosing to live for myself was harder than I imagined. It wasn't just about paying bills alone or learning how to sleep without another body beside me. It was about unlearning the reflex to measure my life against his moods, his silence, his approval. I had to teach myself that my worth wasn't tied to being needed, that love wasn't supposed to feel like an endless list of sacrifices that no one noticed. There were setbacks. Nights when I scrolled through old photos wondering if the smiles had ever been real. Days when grief struck out of nowhere in the cereal aisle, in the smell of his cologne on a jacket I hadn't thrown away yet. But grief is a teacher, and what it taught me was this: pain can be survived, and survival slowly, stubbornly, becomes strength. One evening after a long day at work, I came home to find an envelope slipped under my door. His handwriting. My chest tightened as I picked it up, half afraid of what it might contain. Inside was a letter, not an apology, not really. More like a confession scrawled in uneven lines. He wrote that he hadn't expected me to actually cut him off, that he thought I'd cave as I always had before. That when I didn't, he realized just how much he had leaned on me, how little he had stood on his own. He said he was sorry, but the words rang hollow. They weren't for me, they were for his guilt. I folded the letter, placed it in a box with other remnants of him, and set it high on a shelf. Not to revisit, just to remind myself of where I'd been and why I couldn't go back. Months later, I stood in front of a judge again. Not for spousal support this time, but for the divorce decree. He didn't show up. The paperwork was signed quickly, almost anticlimactically. Years of love and labor dissolved with a stamp and a signature. I walked out of the courthouse into a bright afternoon, the sky impossibly blue, and felt lighter than I had in years. Afterward, I called Lena, my best friend, and she laughed through tears. "You're free," she said. And for once the word didn't sting, it sang. Freedom, I've learned, isn't loud. It doesn't always come with fireworks or grand declarations. Sometimes it comes in the quiet of a pottery studio, your hands steady on the clay. Sometimes it comes in the stillness of your own apartment, with new plants reaching toward the sun. Sometimes it comes in the simple, radical act of choosing yourself. If you're listening to this and you've ever been left behind, if someone told you they were moving out, if they tried to turn their absence into your burden, hear me. You are not the wreckage they left. You are the builder of what comes after. You don't have to wait for their apology, their validation, their permission. You can close the door, cancel the cards, and carve out a life that is yours alone. This isn't the ending I once imagined, but it's mine, and it's enough. If my story stayed with you, if it reminded you of your own strength, or gave you a little more courage to walk away from someone who doesn't honor you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe for more stories told from the heart. And if you faced your own betrayal, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear how you found your freedom.